everyone, and welcome to the 5th episode of the EduLeaders Speak podcast by EduEnhance, where we have the pleasure of bringing together and having conversations with education leaders and pioneers from our region. Today, we have the pleasure of welcoming Dr. Adrianna Joy Chestnut to actually get into a holistic lens on school leadership in the UAE. Dr. Adrianna Joy Chestnut, I like to think of her as a serial founder because of all the years you spent founding schools, successful schools in the UAE. You've got over 13 years of experience in education across the UAE and USA. You've been the founding principal for several schools, including Bright Learners Private School in Dubai during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, and the Liva International School Al Qatara in Al Ain. And you've had experience. Your experience spans the public, private, and government education sectors. You were also working with the Abu Dhabi Department of Education and Knowledge. And prior to moving to the UAE, you also had multiple leadership roles with schools in the US, including spearheading school turnaround initiatives in Cleveland, Ohio. Now, based in Abu Dhabi, you are also a proud wife and mother of a young son, Yusuf. And you remain deeply committed to educational excellence and involved with schools, helping them develop, evolve, and establish strategic leadership. So thank you and welcome to our podcast.
Thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Iram Farhad Farouk, the CEO of EduEnhance, and
Thank you, Bushra. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Always a pleasure to be here co-hosting with Bushra. Adrianna, what a pleasure to have you on our podcast.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
You know, we were just talking about it. We met years ago. It was the height of COVID. And I got a call. This must be, August of 2020?
Yes.
And I got a call, and it was Adrianna. And she said that I'm a founding principal of a school in Dubai, and is it possible for you to visit me? And I said, wow, this must be some committed principal. Nobody wants to see anybody in person, and she wants me to come down to the school building. So I went, I was wearing my mask, and I stepped in, and Adrianna was sitting in a small little office, and there was construction going on at the back. And we sat 3 meters apart, as per regulations, wearing our masks. And we had this conversation that went on and on because I started telling Adrianna about the program we were offering, iReady, and how it could help with personalized learning and intervention, and how it's helping students in the UAE and in the region. And we just sort of, clicked, and the rest is history. Yes. We've been working together, collaborating. So, Adrianna, my first question to you would be, what is your why? What do you do what you do so well?
I think that's such a lovely question to start with. I think if you've been in education, you've had a chance to see the Simon Sinek podcast that everyone starts every year with starting with the why and thinking about why we do what we do and how it impacts everything else that we're doing. For me, it was quite simple. I wanted to be the teacher, the educator that I needed and that I sometimes had and sometimes didn't have. And so being that person who can always be an advocate for students, who can fill in the gap, who can create those environments to support students and what they need. So it was all about showing up, being visible in those spaces, letting students see leaders who look like them, who they may not traditionally see, and people, again, who are going to advocate and stand up for them. So that's always at the core of what I do. And now that I'm a new mom, it's also thinking about how do I always create spaces that I would want my own child to be in. So when I think about how do we create those spaces within the schools to support students and support all students to make sure that they're learning and they feel safe and they feel loved. So that's the core of why I do what I do.
It's wonderful. And as you said, being a mom brings this added perspective to an educator.
Absolutely.
So that's so wonderful to learn. My next question would be that as a founding principal of a school, what are those key areas or strategies that you have to have in place in order to begin this journey?
I think the interesting thing is whenever I start a school, I tell the team that this is going to feel like we're building a plane as we're flying it.
Wow.
Right? Because there's a lot of moving pieces and parts, a lot of things that you're trying to figure out, a lot of elements and core components. But I think when you talk about the key strategies, it's about creating the environment for learning. Creating the space for learning where students and staff alike want to be there. And so I think that's the biggest hurdle. So making sure that you create a mission and a vision that's not just laminated, but is lived. Right? So I think we do a great job, especially in the UAE, of creating these robust learning environments. The schools look lovely, right? You walk in, it looks like you're in a magazine. It looks
True.
like this is
Agreed.
straight from the showcase floor. But we want to create those environments that truly embed learning in every aspect of what we're doing. So I think when I think about strategies, I think about the environment first. I think about how can we support students in teaching and learning, and just thinking about what does that look like. So especially for new schools, you have teachers who are coming from all different spaces and places. So what good teaching and learning may look like in one space may be defined a bit differently somewhere else. So it's about coming in, having a shared vision, making sure everyone is aligned and everybody is, again, just going towards whatever your goals are as a school. And so those are the most important elements. I think after that, the other components can fall into place. But once the team is on the same page, going in the same direction, I think it makes it a bit easier because we want to be there.
Absolutely, and you've articulated the big picture so well that you have the big picture first, and then of course you have the smaller components, very important ones. Nonetheless, you know what they say, don't ask for direction if you don't know where you're going. So at least have that, the big vision first in place, and then follow through with the next steps.
It's always so inspiring and motivating to hear you speak, Adrianna, even in our conversations and the work we do together. And I love how you started off with the focus on culture and environment, because without those pieces, things can really fall apart. So our next question, just sort of as we transition to talking about the role of data and assessment tools, my next question is around the role of data in shaping decision-making at the school level. Where would you place that? Do you see that aligning with your work in developing culture and environment, or do you see that serving a different purpose? Just getting your thoughts on what data you think is most critical in setting up and operating a school.
I think when you think about data, you have to think about it holistically. And so I think sometimes we try to compartmentalize data and look at it as separate of culture, but it's actually a part of the culture. And I think the data has to be a part of who we are as a school. We have to look at it as this tells our story. Right? It tells the things that underlie, it tells us why things are happening. And so I think those components are important to make sure that you're looking at it. So for me, data is everything, right? But it's more than just the numbers. So I tell the teachers, I tell the students as well, especially, but when we're looking at it as a team, they have to put names with that data, right? So we're not just saying 90%, like who's in that 90%? Who's in the 10% that is missing? And making sure that, again, when we're telling our story, it helps us understand what actions we need to take and what things we need to prioritize. But I think if I'm thinking about particulars, especially in a founding role, of the data that we really need to look at and the key things that I want to just monitor. One, I'm looking at where the student starting points are. So things like the diagnostic exams and things are important because we want to know what's our starting point. Because then we cannot triage, essentially, we cannot go in and support students if we don't know where they're starting at. Because again, as I mentioned, teachers are coming from different spaces and places, but so are the students. And so their levels are going to be all over the place. And so we have to make sure that we are being very intentional about it. You also want to look at behavioral data because when we say we're setting the culture, especially for a new school, within a new role, you have to look at what behaviors are we seeing and then how do we provide intervention and support. So for me as a leader, I'm always going from a lens of support. How do I go in and support the teachers? How do I support the students? How do we support the parents, just to make sure we're all working together? So those are some key components of the data that I'm looking at always. And then always attendance as well. So attendance of the students and the staff, because the teachers have to show up every day. In order for things to be effective, we have to make sure we're doing things with fidelity. And so if there's some underlying issues, I think the data just helps us kind of pinpoint what things we need to focus on.
Excellent. Again, it's so important to use data with fidelity. But when you look at early childhood and you look at kids who have just started or just starting school, so how do you ensure that this child is school ready? So are there any tools or any assessments that can be useful to measure school readiness?
Definitely. I think one thing we think about in the context, especially of the UAE, is about when school is compulsory. And so what I've experienced in the roles here, that sometimes when you're starting KG1 and KG2, this might be the child's first time in an organized school setting.
Correct.
And so you have students who may be coming from being at home and they're with either parents or caregivers, but they haven't been in a traditional school setting. And then also sometimes there's a gap between how nurseries prepare students for school and making sure they're ready. And so on that school readiness, I guess, scale, you have students who come in and they're already reading, and you have students who come in and they've never seen the language of instruction at all.
Absolutely.
And then also in the context of within the UAE, a majority of students may be second language learners of English.
That's right.
If that's the language of instruction. But I think tools like diagnostic exams, the Grants works really well for early learning and early literacy to make sure that students and teachers have a common just knowledge and framework of how we're assessing what it looks like. But I think the biggest thing is when we're looking at those kind of early diagnostic tools is what do we do after it? So once we have the information, once we have the data, once we see where the students are and what their entry points are, what do we do after? What's our next step? And how do we support those students who have different gaps and who are coming to us at varying levels of readiness and varying levels of success? And also, I think communicating that with the parents so they can support as well.
Excellent. Because that was my next question. So once you have run the screens, you've run the tests, you've seen where the child's gaps are, where the child is below cutoff or on level or gifted category, how do you have the conversation with the parents? Is it useful to have some kind of a report from a third party, or parents are comfortable getting the feedback from the school?
I think a combination, right? But I think you have to have a people-first approach. So I can't just sit down with them with the report and say, here's this report from someone else, read it and understand it. Right? I have to come to them and approach them as a parent, as a person who's saying, hey, we have a common interest. We both want to make sure your child is successful. So my approach is always, I start with the positives. Let's talk about what your child can do, what they're doing well, what things we want to build off of. And then when we talk about the things that they aren't able to do yet, right, that's important that we're explaining that to parents. Hey, they can't quite do this yet, but here's how we're going to work with them. And then you talk about ways that you can support them at school and ways the parent can support them at home. I think for parents, they have to feel comfortable. They have to trust the school as well. And then the report is something that can supplement and support what you're saying. To just say, hey, we've already talked about these things, but here's something you can go home for further reading that just goes a bit deeper into what we've already discussed. But the reports are important as well, because sometimes those conversations can be overwhelming for parents, especially if they're a new parent in school and they haven't had children before, or even if they're a parent with multiple children, because every child is different. And so sometimes hearing that information, you may not receive all of it at once. So that's when the reports are helpful, and it helps further break down different things. It also helps parents in the context of if they have support at home, or if they have a caregiver or a tutor, those reports can really help them know where to focus and what things to do. But I think those conversations are vital. It's very important that you have them early and you have them often, so you can clearly communicate, again, what the child is doing well and then what areas they need more support in. But I think we have to reshape the conversations, because sometimes they can have a negative undertone, or sometimes educators may start with the negative and say, hey, your child isn't ready, or your child doesn't know this, and they don't know this, and then the parents will shut down. So we have to look at parents as partners and think about how do we want our partners to communicate with us. And we have to do the same for our parents.
So that approach and perhaps some bit of training for the teachers would be so crucial.
Absolutely.
Because sometimes what you're saying is right, but how you're saying it makes the difference, right?
And you don't want them to shut down from the beginning, because sometimes it's harder to pull them back in if you've lost them.
Right.
But if they see from the beginning there's someone who cares about my child, they want them to do better, and and we're helping them know what to do as well. Because again, parents aren't always educators by trade, so they may want to help, but they may not know what to do. And it's our job to kind of throw out that life support and to help them and say, hey, here's what we can do together. Here's how we monitor this to move your child forward.
Excellent. But what if the school diagnoses or observes that there might be some special ed requirements, and how do you have that conversation?
I think in the same way. So just coming from a place of partnership, I think there is a huge stigma around special education, and a lot of parents, again, that's hard information to hear.
Correct.
And so they may feel like, no, my child is okay, there's nothing wrong with them, maybe they need a new teacher. And so I think, again, when data is a part of your culture as a school, and when you have worked with your teachers to really understand your students, to build those relationships, to have rigorous routines in their classrooms, then they're able to articulate, here's some things that we've seen, here's some things that we've tried, and here's the results of it. Right, so I think it's very difficult when you just go to a parent and say, here's what's wrong, and you haven't tried to assist the child or provide any kind of alternate ways of teaching and learning to support their needs. But I think, again, it's a difficult conversation to have. And I think educators should be aware of that when going into it, and know that parents may be hesitant, but understandably so. Right, and I think we just have to put ourselves in their shoes sometimes to just really think about, if I was receiving this news, how would it feel? How would I go forward with it? So I think it's just all about taking it one step at a time, one day at a time, telling the parents that a diagnosis, or if their child does need support, it doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It doesn't mean that they've done something wrong.
Oh, so important.
And, you know, so
important for parents to know that and believe that.
Absolutely, because a lot of parents take it very personally.
True.
As if they've done something wrong, or something is wrong with them, or something is wrong with their child. But I just tell them all students will benefit for individualized support. All students will benefit from, just having an extra person to care after them. And so that's what I tell the parent. It's just your child just has more people to love them, more people to support them, and here's how we're going to help them reach their goals.
Okay.
I feel there are so many nuggets of wisdom in what you're talking about, and seeing all those dots come together, how data is the foundation of culture, and also the role of information in the work that you do and how you approach it and how you communicate it. There's always so much I learn when hearing you speak. So that's a natural transition into talking about inclusion and special education, also something we care about deeply. And something that cuts across a lot of the programs and work that we do is actually response to intervention, RTI, which again seems to be one of those new acronyms in the region in some ways. So our question to you is, what does a strong response to intervention framework look like in practice, especially in the context of schools in our region?
I think one, as you talk about the relationship with data and how we use it to support what we're doing, I think when you think about the RTI kind of triangle, right, that's the visual you always see with Tier 1, 2, and 3. I think sometimes we have to realize that it may be inverted for a lot of our schools here, where your Tier 3 may be your largest tier. And so when thinking about how do you support students, how do you support the gaps that you may see, and then how are you pushing them along? So I think, again, looking at each child as an individual, that's what RTI is all about, right? So when we're thinking about the intervention and support that we're providing for students, you have to be clear. You have to know, again, where they're starting. You have to know where they're going, right? You have to have a goal in mind, and you have to have a clear process. So whether that be working with them in small groups, having individualized instruction, using tools like iReady to help support their individualized goals and the targets that they need to reach. But I think RTI is a overall way of just saying have a plan for each person, right? So how are we intervening early and often? How are we making sure that we're always providing the support for students that's needed? So when I look at the RTI plan and we're looking at the 3 different tiers, so tiers 1, 2, and 3, we're really just looking at how do we support the students with the highest level of need, and then how do we support the students who are there but still need an extra push, because we always want to make sure we have challenge and support for every child in the building. No matter if they're on level, below, or above, we always want to challenge them. We always want to push them to the next level. And so I think RTI helps put a framework in place to make sure that's happening for every child, and not just the ones who, I think sometimes schools can focus solely on Tier 3 because they're the ones who need the most support. But then sometimes you have the ones who are in Tier 1 who don't move. And you'll see they're green, but they're always green, and they never get that extra push, or they're the ones who are just kind of asked to, okay, you go help your friend because you finished early. And so I think RTI helps give us that framework of how do we support every child with their personalized learning needs.
I'll just quickly clarify, I'm having an allergic reaction to material. It's not because you're making me sad. So I thought
it was just so moving. I thought it was moving you to tears.
It's very moving, because actually there's something you said in that, like this light bulb just went off, where you said that in our region, yes, typically we do expect to see a larger Tier 3 than the Tier 1. And I have a question there. Should that scare us, or should we try to understand, is there a contextual reason for it, or is that a manageable situation, or is this a sign of I don't know, tragedy or whatever? Like, is this something to be worried? How do you approach it if a school sees that Tier 3 being so large?
I don't think it's something we should fear, right? I think it's something that we have to understand what the reason behind it is. But as I mentioned, when you have a majority of students who are second language learners, right? And so, and you have, in this country, the beautiful thing is all students are being taught in 2 different languages, right? So when I'm looking at my students in the U.S., and 100% of their education is in one language, they have 3 classes per day. Then I come over here to the UAE, they're 50% in English, 50% in Arabic. They're switching between topics, between subjects, between teachers. That is a lot for a young mind to wrap around each day, right? So I think we have to celebrate the complexity in the education and what they're doing here. And also realizing it's a very young country, right? So the strides that have been taken in education in just this short period of time is to be commended, right? So I don't think it's anything to be fearful of. You have to use the data to see, okay, what is the reason the student is a tier 3? Is it the language barrier? Is it they don't understand? Is it they don't comprehend? Is it they have a learning deficiency? And so you see kind of what the root cause of it is, and then you can provide those interventions. So for me, it's not something that is scary at all. It can be exciting, right? Because every day is a new challenge. Every day you're doing something new. No 2 days are the same. And the reality is there's many countries around the world, including U.S. Every school I've worked at in the U.S., because I worked with high need populations, it was the same. We had the same inverted triangle. We had the same where tier 3 was the largest tier. And so I think that's when you just have to have educators who are very invested in the work that they're doing and who really enjoy what they're doing, so they can provide those supports for the students and they can make sure they're providing the accommodations that are needed.
Thank you so much for saying that. It's so empowering to hear that from you as well as someone, an experienced educator in so many contexts. And so I think a natural concern that arises among schools is with budgets being tight and resources being expensive. So tier 3 can be large or larger than expected. What are some strategies you would suggest for schools to implement flexible support structures without having very large intervention or special ed departments?
I think it's about using the people and the teams that you have and recognizing each adult as a professional in the building. And so I think this comes to the relationships and really knowing the teams that you have. So for instance, in every school, when we work with the CAs and the TAs, I make sure that we empower them and we let them know you all are not here to make copies and laminate and do bulletin boards. Especially in this country, the CAs and the TAs are highly educated. I've had many who've had master's degrees. They've been teachers in their own countries, respectively. And so really utilizing that level of support to make sure that they're working with the students in a very intentional way. It also means working with the teachers so they understand how to utilize the extra supports they may have in the classroom. Because you will find some schools can be very resource rich, but if people don't know the resources that are available and they don't know how to utilize them, they'll sit in the closet. You'll see many storerooms that have things wrapped in plastic, and you'll walk in schools and you'll see people sitting in corridors and sitting in hallways. And so you have to provide purpose behind the resources as well. And so I think once everybody has a role, everybody knows how they can support it. Everybody knows that they're a very important part of the team. I think that helps move things forward when the budget may be tighter than you may want it to be. But I think there is, again, there just has to be purpose in the purchases, essentially. And so in everything that we're buying or utilizing within the school, we have to make sure it's purposeful. And I think once everybody knows, again, the role that they play in that and how they can support student learning and how they're an important part of this process, then I think it helps just navigate some of those situations.
Thank you so much. I think that's super valuable.
Very insightful indeed. And I must add here, I always tell my kids and my colleagues, everyone, thank God we are born in the 21st century. Thank God there's technology there to help us with all of these challenges that you just mentioned. So first thing is, of course, the teacher, and never ever to take away the importance of a teacher in the classroom. But then if you empower her with the right technology and tools, then all of that becomes possible, where you're personalizing instruction, where you're offering adaptive diagnostics, where you are measuring growth. So all of that becomes far more achievable once you have the right technology with you. And the other thing I really appreciate what you said is that having the right technology or the resource is one thing, but utilizing it to ensure that it fits your needs and your requirements, that is the most critical thing. And that perhaps happens once you take the teachers on board and have them feel what an important stakeholders they are in this whole process. So yes, there is the leadership and there's the parents, but a teacher, the kind of influence a teacher is having on the child, I think that's unmatched.
Absolutely.
So I think let's talk about a bit about teacher training and professional development in the region. How do you feel, or what do you think are the paramount strategies when it comes to professional development for teachers who come from different cultures, different countries, different trainings? So how would you come up with a professional development model that is actually personalized to each teacher's needs as well?
I think therein lies the answer, right? So thinking about how do you come up with a model that's personalized to their needs. You have to realize it's not one size fits all. And so I think the mistake that we sometimes make as school leaders, we expect teachers to individualize instruction. We expect teachers to differentiate. We don't always offer that same courtesy to them. And
true.
so making sure that what we do is purposeful, what we do is needed. Now there's times as a leader where you will have to do school-wide training or school-wide PD. But I think sometimes in the crunch for time, PD sessions often become just staff meetings or where you're just giving out information. So I try to move away from just sit and get, where teachers are just sitting there and not really engaging in the content, to making sure that PD is purposeful and they're walking away with it with something they need. And so when we're planning PD, we have to think about how can this impact what they're doing tomorrow? How can this impact what they're doing next week? And making sure there's something they actually need. So in the beginning of the year, a leader may start with staff surveys to just say, again, what do you need as a teacher? What do you need for support? And also realizing some people may not know at that time. And so making sure that that's ongoing. It shouldn't just happen one time. But also, again, celebrating the small wins, the quick wins, and utilizing the expertise in the building. Oftentimes we have teachers who are very skilled in different areas.
Correct.
So how can we utilize them to help support colleagues? So that may look like peer observations, that may look like teacher-led PD and teacher-led trainings, and giving them that opportunity to kind of share their expertise. It may look like, again, classroom observations, but also always making sure that you have a pulse on the school to see what training is needed and what support is needed. It shouldn't just be, I've seen some schools plan the PD calendar at the beginning of the year. To say, here's the PD we're doing every week from now into July, and I don't understand how they can do that without knowing, again, here's the needs of the school, here's some things we need to address, here's some things that we're doing well, so we don't need a training on this right now. However, we need to supplement it with something else. And thinking about, again, how can we differentiate, how can we individualize training to make sure that we're truly supporting our teachers in a very intentional way. Because as adults, we have a shorter attention span than our students. And so it is, oh my goodness, you all know. You go in and do the trainings. It is very hard to keep adults engaged.
It
is very hard to keep adults engaged because we always have a running tab of here are the things I need to do. And sometimes teachers will see professional development as a barrier between what I have to do and what I need to do. Correct. So this PD is something I have to do right now because it's compulsory. We have to sign in, we have to sign out. But what I need to do, I need to be in my classroom. I need to grade these papers. I need to mark the notebooks. So I think as a leader, sometimes you have to balance it and give them that space for those things that they need to do that are compulsory and the things that they have to do. So really, I think respecting them as professionals, respecting their time. So that's why self-paced PD is a great idea and a great way to implement some things for people because, again, respecting their time as professionals. And oftentimes teachers have every single minute planned out for them. Every day after school, there's a meeting, there's a committee, there's something, and they don't have time to even just think sometimes. And so we have to make sure we intertwine that into the professional development as well.
So it's all about thinking insightfully, thinking from the heart.
Absolutely.
And not just ticking boxes.
Yes.
Right?
And we fall into that trap sometimes of ticking boxes, especially when we think about school inspections and we think about attic visits and MOE visits and ERDICA, and it becomes very easy to just, okay, we need this for standard 1, this for standard 2, but we have to think about how can we be intentional about everything we're doing. How can we respect their time as professionals? How can we support them as professionals and not with the assumption of nobody knows what to do and nobody has the knowledge, except for me as the principal. We have to realize that there is knowledge and there's expertise all throughout the school.
Correct. Yeah. No, that's why every time we go into a school building, we come out feeling so much more respect for the school leaders, for the teachers, because the kind of schedules you guys have, and it's like clockwork. Everything has to be done. And of course, as a leader, you have a huge responsibility on your shoulders as well, because accountability at the end of the day lies with the leader, right? So it's quite commendable how you use technology to help you, data to support your endeavors. The next question regarding PD is, in terms of coaching, now that is one thing that we've been recently hearing about and learning the benefits of coaching, because we do see, and there's some research done on that as well, that if you have workshops or training sessions in the beginning of the year, or even if you have it once a month, how much of that is being implemented in the classroom, the learning that teachers undertake? And then do you see the improvement once a workshop is conducted, and how do you evaluate that concept or that learning is implemented in the classroom? And secondly, in terms of an ongoing support to that teacher, do you have coaches who are allocated to every teacher, instructional coaches in the schools?
So I would say, in response to the first question about how is it ongoing and supportive, I think that goes back to the point of being intentional about the training that you're doing within the school. So every training should have a purpose behind it, and make sure that it is very intentional. So for me, when we're planning PD, we have different themes that we may focus on based off of the needs of what we see. So we may say, okay, we've been through walkthroughs within the school, and we've noticed that 77% of teachers need help with questioning techniques. So the next session will be on questioning techniques. So when we provide that PD, we also make sure that our next set of walkthroughs is focused on seeing the implementation of the things that we've just worked on. So making sure that the teachers are able to utilize it in practice. For the teachers who need further support, we're making sure that we align them with somebody either from SLT or with one of their colleagues to help further support them in that initiative. And then again, celebrating the quick wins. So what you would see in my newsletters that I would send out to staff, it would say, okay, this week we've saw additional 12 teachers. I really want to shout out X, Y, and Z. They've been doing some wonderful things in questioning. If you have a chance, stop by their classroom to see, some techniques that they're using, and making sure that we support that so teachers know that the PD that they're doing has an impact in their practice. And I think that makes the future sessions more purposeful, and it makes them a bit more attentive, because they know this isn't one and done. This isn't something that we're doing again to just tick off the list and we won't talk about it again. So if we set questioning as a need and something that will impact how we teach students and how they're learning, if they never hear about it again, that means none of your PD will stick in terms of what they're doing. So again, we have to think about how do we take it from theory to practice, and how does this impact what they're doing. For me, I try to always focus on how will this make your life easier as a teacher.
Good one,
right? Because they have so much on their plate. They have so many competing priorities. They have different things they have to do. If you're a teacher who is a subject teacher, you might have over 100 students that you're focusing on. And so really thinking about, again, what's the impact for this teacher? How does it take something off their plate? But as a leader, it's our job to make sure that we're monitoring the progress and then supporting those who need support. And the ones who are ready to go to the next step, let them. So don't have them sit in the same training again if they don't need it. And so let them go on. So we've done targeted PD sessions. We've done small group PD sessions, but again, not in a punitive way. So I'm not saying, okay, you need to come back to the PD because you didn't get it.
Right.
So it is in a way that is still respectful. It is still respecting them as professionals, but still allowing them to get the support that they need.
So I'm just thinking, Adrianna, that's so beautifully put, because again, you're tying things together: professional development, feedback, observations, all of it sort of supporting at the end of the day your goal of creating learning environments that are truly engaging and achieving intended outcomes. So now I'm just listening to you and I'm wondering what role technology could play in this picture, where you're observing so many teachers, you're trying to share feedback with so many different teachers and try to personalize their learning as well. Different teachers may struggle with different techniques for different reasons. So what role do you see technology potentially playing in enhancing the efficiency and efficacy of PD programs. I'm just going to hand that over to you for now and then maybe ask more specific questions.
I think one, it helps kind of organize things. So that's the first thing. So that's the role that I have been using technology for currently, is helping put it all in one place. Because again, as a leader, you have a lot of moving pieces and parts. You have different teachers who have different needs. You have the students' needs that you're trying to track, and everything in between. So I think seeing everything in one place helps you really clearly see the big picture. So when you talk about planning with intention and planning with purpose, you have to, again, have the data. You have to know kind of what direction you're going in. So I think for me, once I'm able to see the snapshot of my teachers and seeing, okay, for all the teachers, here's their top 3 strengths, the top 3 areas of support, it helps me know how to plan my PDs and help me know how to, again, support the teachers. Then from there, I'm able to track their progress and track the different things. So I have kind of a walkthrough tracker where I'm seeing how often are we getting into the classrooms, how often are we providing support, how often are we providing feedback, because I think it becomes past just being visible, but you have to give that feedback to teachers. And it's very easy to walk in the classroom, walk out and not say anything. So that teacher's thinking, okay, did I do well? Was it not good? Did they like it? Did they not like it? And so it gives us a way to make sure we're tracking that. But for me, I also have a way that when I'm in the classroom, I can quickly send a note of feedback to that teacher. And again, I focus on the things that went well. I focus on the strengths. And if there is areas that they need support in, I'm only giving them 1 or 2. So you don't want to overwhelm. You don't want to provide too many things in terms of that where they don't know where to start or what to focus on. So I think about what are the big priorities and the big rocks with that. Also for technology, we have found it helpful to send either tutorials or trainings or videos. And I've used that as a way to reinforce topics that we've already worked on. And so again, thinking about students, sometimes they need it in a different way, or they need to hear it again in order for some things to stick. And so we've utilized technology in that way, but also allowing teachers the opportunity to kind of reflect on their own practice and reflect on the things they're doing. So we had colleagues who have recorded each other or recorded themselves when they're teaching so they can watch it back. I've had a lot of educators who may be unaware of some things they're doing, and they may not know, even us all the time, you may not know that you're doing something until you watch it back on the video. And so I found that technology has been very helpful in that way as well.
Thank you so much. That's very insightful because right now we're really excited about exploring the use of technology in making professional development more effective, more scalable, more impactful. And one of the things we're looking at is video-based observations, especially if you have a larger school or you have a multi-school group. So, and there could be coaches who are sort of giving feedback based on recorded lessons as opposed to having to be in different classrooms at the same time. What do you see any potential in that technology to drive professional development, observations, and coaching?
Absolutely. I think sometimes that can take the fear out of observations. I think for some teachers, just someone walking in their classroom can be they become nervous. Some teachers become intimidated. Some teachers become where they feel like they're under a microscope. And even the students, sometimes their behavior may change positively or negatively when someone else enters the classroom, because it becomes that focus is no longer on the teacher and the students, it's on the person who's in the back of the classroom. And we may think sometimes we're in there in stealth mode where we're quiet, but ultimately the students are looking at me when I'm typing on my computer or when I'm writing things or when I'm walking around the room. So I think when you're looking at something like that, it gives you a chance to see a very authentic view of the classroom, and also gives the teacher a chance to see themselves in a non-challenging way. And so I definitely think that can support instruction and support feedback where, again, the teachers doesn't feel like they're on front and center in the stage, whereas they can just be themselves and continue teaching and get very authentic feedback. So it isn't okay, the principal's in the room, we need to sit up straight, right? So then I can truly see how are the behaviors in the classroom, because that's what we want to provide support for. That's what we want to acknowledge in terms of the practices that are actually happen day by day in the classroom. So I definitely can see that being a tool that can positively support like teachers in schools. And like you mentioned, some schools are very large. The leaders can't be everywhere at once. And you can't be in every classroom. And so I do think this is a way to provide coaching and support that is based on the inspection framework, that's based on best practices, and really pushing forward the things that need to be prioritized within the schools.
That sounds incredible, and also gives us so much more perspective on how video can support educators, especially when you said non-challenging way to self-reflect and be observed. I think that's such a powerful aspect of this technology.
And non-intimidating.
Yes,
because
definitely.
it is but natural that if you are teaching, we've been teachers
Absolutely,
ourselves.
absolutely.
If you're being observed, it can get quite intimidating, right?
And sometimes it becomes a show. Even our most effective and most impactful teachers, sometimes again they feel that pressure in terms of someone's in my room, they're watching me. Let me make sure that I'm doing, 1, 2, and 3. And sometimes we found that leads to increased teacher talk time because they feel like they have to put on a show for us as opposed to making sure they're doing everything they can for the students. So I definitely think it can be a non-threatening way to help support teachers.
Absolutely. And if the privacy concerns are addressed and your data is confidential, your recordings are confidential, then I don't see any harm in going this route,
Definitely.
right? Video-based coaching. But Adrianna, a quick one. How many hours of PD would you recommend as a school leader to a teacher on an average, let's say?
I do know ADIC has recently came out with guidelines with the amount of hours that are compulsory. So essentially, you would need to have at least a few hours of training every week to help support the teachers. So most schools will have it where 1 day per week is dedicated towards like PD or professional learning. Again, I have always wanted to balance that, how I talk about the things the teachers have to do and need to do in their classrooms. So I always want to give teachers that space and that time. But I really think it depends on the needs of the teacher. I have some teachers who need very targeted support, who need, intense intervention. I have some teachers who are doing phenomenal things in the classroom, and they just need to kind of, okay, let's take it up just a notch, and let's do different things. Continue everything you're doing, but here's how we can push it even further. So I think it really depends on the educator and their individual needs. But I never want to have someone sitting in a training just for the sake of sitting in the training.
And that goes back to our initial conversation where we said one size fits all doesn't work for teachers
Definitely.
either. So might as well have a platform, let technology help us, where every teacher has her own pathway.
Definitely.
And you're addressing the needs of that individual educator rather than having one size fits all.
That's so relevant because when we were thinking about going further into PD, we could have just come up with a list of topics and said, okay, let's just go to schools and just take these topics. But we were thinking, how can we move forward and bring something new to the region that would actually lead to a shift in practice? Because that's the biggest gap we saw. That everyone was frustrated. The facilitators, the teachers, the leaders, we're doing session after session, but it's not really leading to a change in practice. Because that's a whole learning process that we designed for students, and why aren't we designing that for teachers? And my concern is that people will see the new ADIC requirements as we have to check a box, we have to somehow fit in 8 hours. When to me, it is a sign that the leadership is suggesting we need to develop a culture of continuous learning.
Absolutely.
It's not 8 hours of sitting in a workshop. It's a couple of hours of maybe peer-led, collaborative work, maybe observations, maybe self-reflection. So if schools take a holistic approach to professional development like they do to student well-being in other areas, they could see a lot more success. And at the end of the day, what we all want to see is growth and development for everyone, for teachers and for students. So I think that's really powerful that you cited that, and that's something that's really guided our own thinking about it. Would you have any tips for leaders and teachers and schools in developing cultures of continuous learning?
I think listening to the people that are there in the building, right? So I'm a huge practitioner of Sean Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. So one of the habits is seek first to understand, then to be understood, right? And so when you're thinking about that and thinking about how do I understand the needs of the people in the building before I try to make them understand what I want to impose on them or what I want to have on them. So I think when teachers understand you're coming from a lens of support and a lens of care, I do think that really helps lend itself to just very impactful PD and making sure they know that you're beside them. Also for me, as a leader, I make sure I'm always with them in the trainings because they know that I'm learning alongside them, I'm learning with them, and I'm there to support. It's difficult for me to support a theory, a practice, or a program if I don't know about it. And so how can I provide the support to the teachers, to the educators, if I'm not aware of it? And so not saying that I'm an expert, but I do think it makes a big difference for them to see me alongside them, and I'm answering questions. I'm in the PD, and not just me sitting in the rear on my laptop typing and doing emails, but they see I'm actively engaged. And I think that also kind of shifts their attitudes towards the sessions and the support. And so I make sure that I'm always a practitioner as well when it comes to those things.
It's very powerful. So as a leader, I mean, of course, and it's evident, I've seen you in action, so I know that you lead by example. And this is not something that you just delegate, that this has to be done.
Yes.
So as a leader, my next question would be, if you look at the future now, future of education, future of schools in the region that we live in the UAE, what do you think are the leadership skills that tomorrow's leaders need to lead schools in the region?
We have to be flexible. We have to adapt, right? I think we have to lean into the changes that are happening, and don't be fearful of it. And so when you think about technology integration, you think about AI, you think about the different things that are evolving, I think we have to see how can we best utilize those things. And so how can we use it to support our teachers? How can we use it to support the schools? So when I think about the skills that we need is really just flexibility, being adaptable, and I think empathy is an important thing
I was going
that a
to
lot of
say
people
that.
forget.
Yeah, because when I hear you, the first thing I see is empathy.
Yes.
That's like overarching all your actions, all your beliefs. It's like empathy.
Yes. You have to, teaching is very difficult. And I think oftentimes people discredit the amount of hard work that goes into teaching.
It breaks my heart, by the way.
It does.
Yes.
It does. It's a very vital profession. We make all of the professions possible. And so I think we have to, again, put ourselves in the shoes of the teachers, of the learners, of the parents, and really look at it from that lens of how can I support? If there is a barrier, how do I help go over that bridge? How can I help remove barriers for teachers, for parents, for students? And so I think as a leader, you have to look at it from kind of that servant leader style in terms of how can I support everything that's happening within the school. And so I think leaders need more of that and less of the just kind of systems-led approaches. Like systems are important, procedures are important, but you have to think of the people first.
Makes a lot of sense.
I understand that more and more each day that being a teacher is all about the presence and that awareness because there's so much happening and there's so much trying to accomplish. And so it's so important, I see, for that to start from the top. That presence, that awareness, that sort of, your presence in the room. And that for that, empathy is really key. If you don't have empathy, then you wouldn't want to sense what's going on around you. So thank you so much for touching on that. So I think it's time to tie it all together. There's a cool question on AI, and I'll leave that for Aaron.
Of course, because in our last podcast we had an expert, a guru in AI, and he was telling us about all the different accomplishments that can be achieved with AI in the classrooms and in the education sector in general. And I was telling him that I'm Gen X. It does intimidate me, it does scare me, as I'm sure it scares a lot of us, but it also is exciting because we want to know what we can achieve, what tomorrow's classroom can look like. But in your opinion, what vision should a school have in terms of AI, and what do you think are the challenges that you could face with so much of technology and AI in the classroom?
I think when you think of challenges, I think similar to what you just said, some people are fearful of it. And it is that fear of what is our role as educators when information is so readily available and so easily available. What does instruction look like now in terms of what do students need to know and what do students have to know in terms of, again, just moving forward. But I think even if we rewind a bit, when we were coming up, people were fearful of Google, right? Because it's like, well, we have dictionaries.
Yeah.
Why do we need Google?
Or
people were
calculators, if you go back a few years.
And so I think we have to look at how do these things help support our day-to-day living? How do these things help enhance the things that we're doing? my husband and I joked the other day, I'm like, what did we do before ChatGPT? I have no idea. It's crippled me. Like, I have no idea. Sometimes a simple response, I'm like, oh, let me just ask chat and let me just see what is here. But I think if we look at the ways that it can enhance and support our life, but also realizing that we have to still build those critical thinking skills, because you have to know how to prompt it, right? You have to know how to redirect. You have to know how to read. And so different things like that to just really like cement what our role as educators are. But I think in terms of leading that process, there's a lot of opportunities, but there's a lot of challenges, right? So when you think about the challenges is how do we navigate it well enough to teach the students? Because oftentimes they're further advanced than we are in these programs, in these platforms. I think now kids are born with a smartphone in their hand. So you'll see, my son is 2 and he'll go and he'll find YouTube and he's scrolling through. I'm like, how do you know how to do this? Right? And so they don't have the fear of technology that sometimes we may have.
That's the biggest thing, isn't it?
We just have to jump in. We honestly just have to jump in. We have to embrace it and then not be afraid to make mistakes, not be afraid to be vulnerable, to say, I don't know everything. Let's figure this out together. If we get it wrong, it's okay. We just go back and then try again. And so I think that's the biggest part, is just knowing that we won't have all the answers. We can't have all the answers. But how do we navigate this new and exciting world that is ahead of us and that our students will be fully immersed in? So we can't avoid it.
I mean, again, about being open-minded, not being fearful of technology. So all that is important.
But also, I think about everything you shared previously, and I feel like in your leadership philosophy, that intentionality is also a huge part of it. Like the way you're using it, the way you're planning it, or you're fitting it into culture and what you're trying to achieve. So that's really powerful. If you were advising new school founders in the UAE today, what are 3 things you'd insist they get right from the start?
Number 1, relationships. So being very, very intentional about the relationship with your new families. So making sure as the new principal, you're there to greet the new parents that are coming in. You're meeting the new students that are coming in, with the new teachers that are coming in. So those relationships are key. That people know who you are, you know who they are, and you know how it kind of helps shape the school. Because the people are what makes the school. And so those relationships are key. I think routines. So making sure that you're thinking through what does this look like, and going through every function of the school and being very intentional about what does it look like when students are walking in the hallway. How do we go into the classroom? How do we leave the classroom? What does arrival look like? What does dismissal look like? So all of those things, there's safety in routines. There is a sense of comfort in routines. And then I think the people who are making up the school, when they know that things are orderly, when they know there's something in place, they can help support the vision and support different things. And I think the third thing, outside of relationships and routines, making sure that, I think just the rigor in place of the school itself. And so again, looking at what does learning look like? What does support for learning look like? How are we supporting teachers? How are we supporting students? And so making sure we're providing rigorous instruction within the classroom, within the confines of the class, and making sure that we aren't wasting the time when the students come in. So how are we, again, diagnosing students? How are we looking at their levels? How are we using the baseline to help support learning, to make sure that we are teaching in a rigorous way that really supports and pushes the students forward.
So 3 R's: relationships.
Oh, yeah.
And
that was intentional, yeah? No?
routines.
It wasn't.
And rigor.
It just kind of happened.
I was going to ask if it's intentional.
No, it just kind of happened. You know, I always, at my school in Cleveland, we had like a AAA focus. So we focused on academics, attendance, and attitude. And so all of our goals were kind of linked back to that. So I also think with those type of things, being relatable, that's another R. But just thinking about how do you put out the vision in ways that people remember it, and where it can be, you know, something that they can refer back to. So when I talk about making sure you're living it and not just laminating it, it shouldn't just be on the wall. It should be something that people know this is a part of who we are and how we are in the school. And so it has to be something that kind of sticks with them so they can remember it. So when they are, you know, pulling it out, they're like, oh yeah, relationships and rigor. And, you know, so I think it helps.
Definitely. I think I might be stealing that one from you, living it instead of laminating it. Like that
You
one
have
too,
to.
and the 3
Really, you
Rs.
have to.
All right, so we've had a very rich and serious conversation. Maybe it's time to lighten up just a little bit before we close for today. So we have a bit of a podcast tradition. We conclude with a little yes/no game that consists of a couple of questions. And what you see in front of you, you've got a mini chalkboard and you've got a piece of chalk. Okay, this one is a bit of a test question just to see how honest or willing to be today. Do you hit snooze more than once in the morning?
Gen X.
No. Okay, all right.
The first alarm, I'm done.
Yeah, me too. Remember,
Okay.
we grew up when there was no snooze.
Oh, okay, that's a good point.
And in the U.S., we all have the same alarm clock, and it is quite blaringly.
The one that rings and goes up and down. All right, okay. Have you ever gotten lost in Dubai Mall?
Who hasn't?
Could it be y to the power of 20?
Me too. Okay. Me too,
I've
honestly.
ever
Me
not
too.
been lost in Dubai Mall should be the question.
That's actually a good one. Next one for the next time. Okay. This is kind of serious. Do you think principals need coaching just as much as teachers do? Yes or no? Maybe it's a bit of a leading question. Do you think principals need coaching just as much as teachers do?
More.
Yes. Let's dig into the why here a little bit. In what sense do you think they need coaching? Because shouldn't you already be like a star teacher, a star leader before you become a principal?
I think a big part of it is realizing that nobody has all the answers. And you shouldn't, right? You should always be open. You should always be learning. It should always be a part of the process, but also realizing that it's a heavy role and it's a heavy lift. And I think there has to be someone who's providing you support. There has to be someone who is providing you critical feedback. And so you have to have, I call it critical friends, to have those tough conversations with. Because it's your job to be responsible for every single person in that school. And so you have to have a coach, you have to have someone who can support, who can mentor, and who can just upskill you. But again, education is changing every day. So if I thought that I was done with school once I, finished my degree programs, I wouldn't be an effective leader. So I can't expect the teachers and the students to be practitioners and to continue learning if I'm not willing to do the same.
I'd second that as well. My answer was yes too. Not that I was ever a principal, but in any leadership role, I think it is so critical to have that kind of support. So be open to learning yourself, be open to any positive feedback or negative, whatever feedback you're getting, and also be open to learning. Because as human beings, they say that change is the only constant, right?
That's true.
Which means that if the world is evolving, if the education system is evolving, our children are evolving, then we have to be open to learning and moving along with time.
Aram's so humble. She was the leader of a learning center for hundreds of kids for so long.
But a school principal is a different story,
That's
by
true,
the way.
true,
And I would always say it's so commendable because I had like up to 100 kids, at one time. But the numbers that I see in schools, that is just amazing how you
hundreds of
manage it.
thousands. That's true. One last question. Do you think coaching is underutilized in schools? Yes or no? Okay. Yes. All right. A bit deeper again. What's the why behind your response, and what type of coaching do you think teachers need?
I think sometimes it's a lack of resources and time. And so I think sometimes as leaders, we may have the best intentions, but you may have competing priorities. There's been times that, I wanted to see 5 teachers in a day, but we had a request from ADDIC that had to be responded to, within 3 hours. And so just different things and making sure that we're intentional. We can't be the only person coaching as well. But I think it's about building capacity. It's about the resources that you have available, and making sure that you know who needs the coaching, but also, again, just like with the tiers 1, 2, and 3, not only focusing on the teachers who need the most support, because you don't want the other teachers to feel ignored and like they don't have support. But I think sometimes it's just a matter of everybody stretched very thin, and making sure that you have the capacity to provide the coaching to everyone.
Maybe the right tools and resources
Absolutely.
to do it as well too.
But does that mean, Adrianna, that there should be a separate focus on developing coaches within the school buildings as well? So is that something that you see in schools right now, or?
I think it's happening.
Okay.
I definitely think it's happening, and schools are building up the middle leadership and building up teachers who have a lot of capacity. I also think that tier of teachers are stretched so thin, right? And I said sometimes people are penalized. Good work is sometimes penalized with more work, right? So when you're the high-performing teacher, you're told, okay, you're doing great with this. Now can you help this person? Or you're doing great with this. I want you to develop this program, or I want you to lead this initiative. And so we don't want to penalize it with more work, but again, you want them to be the models. You want them to be the practitioners. And so again, I think there is an onus for us as senior leaders to make sure we're developing, we're pouring into them, we're supporting them so they don't feel like they're stretched so thin, to say, you know what, maybe I shouldn't perform so well, because if I do, I just get more to do.
And there's such a fine line between
It is.
feeling honored and feeling overwhelmed.
Absolutely.
You know?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I can
And we
completely
tap
imagine.
dance on that line daily, I'm sure.
Oh,
I'm sure.
yes.
We're all guilty of it. I think even us, when we're in leadership positions, you know, the better you do, the more work that comes behind it.
So that's a discussion for another day. How to tread that fine line.
Exactly.
Oh,
for sure.
When you find out, please let me know, so I'll be the first one logged into that podcast episode, because it's difficult. It is very difficult, because you want to acknowledge and celebrate those people, but also realizing that means it does come with more to them, and you want to work with the people you know you can depend on, and you know you can count on, and the people you know that will do a good job for the students and for the school, but also being very intentional about, okay, I can't call on this person every time. I can't use them every time, because I still have to build the capacity of others, and I don't want to, miss an opportunity to let someone else lead an initiative because I'm always calling on the same 3 teachers.
Or like how you could ease their burden or incentivize it as well, right? Instead of it just being another thing. So there's a lot to think about there, and we hope to have you back soon for that discussion. However, it's been a wonderful joy. It's been a joy to have Dr. Joy.
That's true.
And thank you so much for joining
Thanks for
us.
having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Adrianna. I wish you all the best with your new endeavors.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right, thank you.